Hey, happy Wednesday, everyone, and welcome back to the I-5 Corridors podcast. You can see us. Actually, if you're listening, you can't, but today is the first time we're putting this on YouTube as well. Tyson Alger here, joined by Shane Hoffman. It's nice to meet you here, Shane.
Yeah.
How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. You know, we've been doing this in person for about a month now, which has been a lot more fun than Zoom, but it feels a little bit more official now that we got the camera.
The in-person has been a lot better because you can actually talk over each other, you can interrupt, you can see kind of stuff.
We interrupt each other all the time, so.
I do think that we're still kind of honing in the audio on the in-person because when you do it remotely, both guys are just uploading their stuff to Zoom, but we're getting there. But it's bye week, and you know this isn't a week off for us. This is actually just a week to get better, just like the Oregon Ducks, who are 5-0. Up to number, what are they in the latest AP?
6, 7.
Yeah, I mean, like they're pretty good, as I wrote in my column this week.
A little bit of a hot take from you.
A little bit of a hot, like I wasn't necessarily trying to like come out and say like Oregon is the best team in the country.
Plaschke style.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what was in my head throughout the whole time writing. Is if you go back and look at the start of the season, full page in the LA Times was a USC is going to go undefeated. Caleb Williams is going to win the Heisman again. Like, here is all the hype. And over the last 5 weeks, you've seen teams specifically like USC last week. Like, they're still 5-0. They still have the best offense in the country. But a lot of teams are beginning to show some warts where I don't quite see those yet for the Ducks. And it's not that they're not apparent, but they just haven't played a Washington yet, which, hey, we'll find that out in a couple weeks. But it's just weird watching this Oregon team and seeing that they have a top 10 offense, a top 10 defense, and you're still not quite sure like how good all of that is.
It was kind of an interesting confluence like the last week or two because you had all the attention from the Colorado fallout, and then the numbers start rolling out where it's like top 10 this, top 10 this, the only team along with like a Michigan to have this, and you're starting to see those numbers where it's like, these are the numbers that usually show early in the season and indicate that this is a type of team that could, you know, be that caliber of program moving forward.
And it's the headline of my story was it's not early anymore, and I did have a couple people reach out and say it still is early, but
and it is.
It is, but we're nearly halfway through the season. Colorado has put up enough points against other teams that I think you can substantially look at that game and say Oregon stopped a good offense. Yeah. Like they torched USC, especially in that second half. So yeah, again, we'll find out here in 2 weeks. Which hey, Washington escaped Saturday night. They almost ruined it for everybody against Arizona, but they escaped. They're 5-0. This is going to be the first top 10 matchup in the history of these two teams.
Because usually it's been that one team or the other has been not only ranked but often a top 10 program. Because if you look back, I mean, Oregon had all those years, and then Washington had the years where they were competing, and then subsequently made the playoff under Chris Peterson, and then Oregon got back up there, and it's been pretty one-sided the last 20 years.
Yeah.
But last year kind of broke that mold a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and if I mean just dating back into the history before the 90s, it was just the Ducks weren't ever a top 10 team, you know, prior until the 1994 run. So Washington was at points. I mean, they won a national title in the early 90s, but I'm stoked for that game. I think that we're going to have a lot of run up to that one, so we'll have time to kind of dive into more stuff. I do want to talk a little bit about just kind of Oregon at the bye. Like, are we buying in yet? Obviously, if you read my story, I'm kind of buying in, but I'm curious now that they've played a fair amount of football games. What are your kind of big hits and misses with this team?
Before I get into that, I want to ask you a question, given that you did just write that piece. When you look at Oregon's game against Texas Tech, you wrote your kind of the seatbelt sign is on column after that, which I thought was a great way to put that in perspective. That's their kind of close call of the season, very hostile environment. Definitely some things that showed up that maybe worried some people that have since been kind of put to rest. For you, what stops that from being Oregon's version of Washington versus Arizona last week, or USC versus Colorado, that game where it's like, okay, this team is great, but they're not perfect? What's different to you about those?
I don't like the way USC closes games. I mean, that game was, and you know, you could make a case that it was Oregon's fault for coming out slow in at the start against Texas Tech, but I just have seen an Oregon team that finishes games where they didn't last year. I mean, that minus the Bo Nix injury in the Washington game, that is really what took the Ducks down last year. Is they couldn't make a stop defensively in the second half against Washington. They couldn't make a stop defensively in the second half against Oregon State.
Their offense bailed them out in a game like Washington State where they did play really good second half. But you're right, the defense, now you probably have a lot more confidence in that unit in terms of they could swing a game down the stretch.
Yeah, and so for them to be able to make plays on the road against I don't think Texas Tech is a great football team, and we've seen that since, but that was a good offense.
Yeah.
They made plays in that you have a quarterback who you know can play in the fourth quarter in the fourth corridor. And then just the way they slammed the door on Colorado 42-6, the way they slammed the door on Stanford 42-6. I just think you've seen a team that's been getting better, and I don't know if you've seen that quite yet from like a USC or a Washington. And this is all nitpick. Like this is the thing that I hate about college football though too, is we drastically change our opinions one week to the next, because last week we were talking about how Washington is looking as good as anybody in the country, and they still very well may be, but I think I've seen Oregon kind of have an obstacle in that Texas Tech game. They survived it, and they've only looked really good since it.
I'm actually a little confused why almost across the board Washington is viewed as the better team in rankings.
Do you think it's just because of the game last year?
I don't,
because before that game last year, Oregon was ahead of Washington in the rankings.
Well,
like they were.
You know what it was in that game? It was Oregon was 6, and Washington was 25.
Yeah.
So I was gonna write about this in the next week or two. Like that game last year, I think you could make the argument started this even quicker ascent for Washington.
Yeah.
Because that was a huge moment for that program, for that quarterback, and you kind of see that residue kind of falling over into the start of this season. And I think you mentioned what am I liking and not liking about Oregon. I think it's early. You would probably have liked to see them play a mid-tier Pac-12 team by now. But the fact of the matter is, there's a bottom, and then there's contenders kind of right now. It still hasn't really parsed itself out. Arizona's a better. Colorado's
so I was going to say, do you think Colorado's that team?
I think they are. I didn't know how many points they put up on USC, and I know a lot of those came late, but they put up a lot of points on USC.
Yeah.
So it's hard to know, because I know it's early, like you said, and there's all these numbers out there, but I don't know what team they could have played that would have swayed opinions one way or the other that they haven't. That wouldn't be a game that could potentially swing the conference like the one in Seattle in 2 weeks.
Right.
Is there anything else that jumps out to you about Oregon that, and we can get nitpicky here, that you haven't liked? Because I have one other thing that we've talked about before, but
you could say the penalties from earlier in the season, but they got better with that.
I almost forgot about that.
Yeah, they got better with that this last week. I think they have 16 sacks through 2 Pac-12 games.
They already, I think, matched the number from last year in entirety. Yeah.
I love watching their linebackers play. Like, those guys are just all over the field.
And they're potentially their best linebacker. At least profile-wise, Justin Jacobs, potentially their best, hasn't even played yet.
Yeah, and then the secondary has been hawking. Like I just
Kyrie Jackson's injury will be interesting to watch.
Exactly. So it's last year. They're again. Maybe it's early, but at this point last year, you could see that the defense just wasn't clicking at times. Like I remember. It was probably around this time last year, people were like, why does Noah Sewell only have 15 tackles through X amount of games? Why? It was a lot of like, why isn't this happening? And right now it's more along the lines of like, why are these stats so good?
Yeah.
Because
it's more of a holy shit, this is happening.
Yeah, because the Ducks have only allowed more than 10 points one time this year. And again, competition, who knows how good it's been, but that's 40% of your season at this point.
Well, and it's easy to have pass defense metrics skewed early in the season when you are blowing people out, because a la USC, Colorado a week ago, when teams are down, they pass more.
Right.
And Oregon's been slamming the door early and then, putting all their weight on that door and not letting up. So the fact that they're as high as they are, and I don't know what they are exactly right now, but I think they were top 20 in pass defense, is impressive.
I went to the Oregon State-Utah game on Friday. and I'm still very intrigued by Oregon State. I just think that they're not an incomplete football team right now, but they're that kid in a class who a teacher gives like a C grade because they know that because they have the potential to grow into it.
Yeah.
I mean, Oregon State essentially dominated Utah in that game, but Utah without Cam Rising is not a team that's going to beat a defense basically beat a sound football team like Oregon State. Watching DJU is a fascinating experience up close because you'll watch him make some 40, 50-yard throws in the air where he's just flicking his wrist and that ball just sails and he's just dotting guys. You'll also see him miss guys in the flat by about like 4 or 5 yards. Yeah. It's almost like a more polarized version of Bo Nix.
So I'm glad you brought that up because before we transition fully to the Beavers, Bo Nix has been really good. There's still been some moments against this lesser competition where he's just missing, specifically Troy Franklin, who's having a fantastic season but could be easily leading the nation in receiving yards, where he's just missing him by a hair. And it's not a big reason to freak out. It's not I don't think Bo Nix is an elite quarterback. But there's going to be times when the quick passing stuff in the run game maybe isn't there, or they have an opportunity to catch a team stumbling on their back foot. And he hasn't put balls in the places deep that a Penix or a Ward or a Williams has done.
There was one specifically this weekend. I think it was a pass. I think it was to Franklin.
There was a Tez Johnson one for sure.
Yeah, where it was basically like a deep slant up the middle. And if Nix leads him or like hits a better, it's probably 6 points. But
there's been 1 or 2 in every game.
Yeah, and there's part of me that, I mean, I think it's just fair to say that like he's not as good of a pure passer as like a Michael Penix is, but Michael Penix might also be the best pure passer in college football right now.
Right. That's the other thing is we're putting him up against this insane kind of
competition. Because if let's say this was Bo Nix's first year at Oregon, we'd probably be singing nothing but praises right now. It's this guy's completing 80% of its passes. He has 16 touchdowns and 1 interception.
Yeah.
His Ducks are 5-0.
You're right.
But also knowing Nix and knowing that he holds himself to a high standard and that he wants to be an NFL quarterback and probably he wants to be an NFL starting quarterback. There's definitely some throws that he needs to improve upon this season.
I think you're right, though. If we went back and looked at last season, it was probably very similar, and we just weren't making a big deal of it because he was still putting up these insane numbers. That transitions back to DJU, where I don't think anyone had a total total kind of direct expectation of what it was going to look like. But there's definitely some meat on the bone there. They just haven't been a very efficient passing attack. It killed them against Washington State. But at the same time, like what they did well last year in terms of defense and run game, they've done well this year. You know, that Washington State game raised some flags about the secondary, but I also think Ward is great. You were at that game. Tell me more about what you saw.
Oregon State's a physical football team, man. I've seen Utah play a lot, and obviously college football rosters change over more now than they ever have before. But Utah is always just a sound physical football team.
And they pushed them around.
On both sides of the ball, and the Beavers were great defensively. They were great on that offensive line. I liked the way that they used DJ a little bit more in the running game, too. I mean, using that, like, 6'5", 245
Were you surprised that they hadn't to this point? Because I was a little bit.
I imagine with that it's more of a kind of break in case of emergency. Sort not in case of emergency, but it's just, kind of like pick your spots. And I think if
Herbert a few years ago,
right, or like if he was more consistently stringing together like 10 and 15-yard passes, maybe you don't have to lean on that side of the game quite as much. But I thought he played really calmly in like the second half of that game. I thought that his passes got better. Bolden's a freaking athlete, man, and like being able to get him the ball in space, and I just loved the creativity too of the 4th and 1 in the second half where they came in.
That was great.
And it looked like they were going to do the traditional like QB sneak, what everyone's doing in football these days, and they're able to pitch it out
the tush push.
Yeah, the tush push. Just one hand on the left cheek, one hand on the right cheek, and one guy up the middle, according to Peyton Manning yesterday on Monday Night Football. So it's you see the potential of that team, and I still think that they have that potential to become a very formidable team. I just don't think that they were quite ready necessarily like 4 weeks into the year going into that Washington State game to be like, we're the done product who is ready to compete for a national. They could still very well compete for this Pac-12 title, but it's going to be a tough road.
I kind of liken it actually, and this is one thing that I've enjoyed and I think gives me confidence going forward. Again, there's an asterisk without Cam Rising, but they really were in control essentially that entire game. I know that first half was like, all right, 7-0.
When we were up 7-0, I told somebody in the press box, I was like, the game could end 7-0. Yeah. Like Utah's not mounting a successful drive, and the one touchdown drive they did, it was like garbage time towards the end anyways.
So I kind of, it makes me think about last season, and I can't remember which loss they were coming off of. It might have been the USC loss at home, where they then bounced back against, I think it was Washington State last year, and they beat them like 24-10. I know it was at Reser, and they made Cam Ward look awful. It was like his least efficient game of the year. And so for them to lose that really tough game on the road, which it looks better and better because I think the Cougars are kind of a tank right now. Yeah. But then to bounce back and beat a Utah, I mean, they're right back in the thick of it.
That was my first game at the renovated Reser too,
yeah,
and to come back for a top 25 game, it was great, man. Yeah. Like the crowd was loud, but it also is a press box where the windows don't open, so it's very, there's a lot of NFL press boxes like this where it's just very, you can't quite get like that full feeling, but then it hits you right in the face when you then go out to the field and like then you're on there.
How does it? I know it's one game. How does it compare to Autzen for you? Sound wise, vibe wise,
it was. I mean, again, it's hard to compare one to the other. It was very loud. The press box shakes up there a little bit too because they built it up and there's seats right underneath you, and so they're pounding their feet.
Can't be worse than what we dealt with last year.
No, not remotely. It's unique in its own way. Autzen kind of has a little bit of like a mystique to it, but like when you're on the field at this new Reser, that stadium goes like it goes pretty vertical up on you.
I like a good vertical stadium.
Yeah.
It's what makes like Husky Stadium look so daunting.
I do. I also really do like, if I was a fan, the one thing that I like about baseball games is like there's a lot of places that you can go to just like drink your beer and like stand and watch and not necessarily be in your seats.
We did in the Braves Stadium.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole kind of main concourse at Oregon State is like they call it Beaver Street, and
that was nice. And then you saw it happening last year, and I was even just like when I leave the press box to kind of walk around, like I ended up wanting to just hang out there.
Yeah, so it was. It was a really cool Friday for Oregon State just to like be able to get that win.
The rare good Friday game too.
Yeah, no kidding.
The funny thing, we walked down together during the Colorado game. Every time I go down to the field at Autzen, I'm like reminded how small it looks when you're on the field. Dude, I know it's loud and there's a mystique, but it's not a big stadium by any means, and it just. You get down there, and everything when you're on the field level looks smaller. Like even in Columbus when we got down there 2 years ago, I was like, okay, it doesn't look quite as scary. And I'm sure the same thing will happen in Seattle.
Do you remember being maybe this is a unique to me memory, but I remember being a kid and going to stadiums, particularly like indoor arenas, maybe an NBA or NHL, and looking like across the ice to the other upper deck seats and just thinking that was on the other side of the freaking world. Like these places were so massive, and again, you're a kid and you haven't been in stadiums every Saturday like I have now as an adult, but it's funny now as an adult to go to certain places that you grew up watching on TV or that you just think are these massive places, and they still are, but like your perception of them gets skewed very quickly in this business.
Do you this will actually transition to something else I want to ask you about, but because we're both about to be in Seattle in about 2 weeks time, a little less actually, they started doing that light show on the touchdown celebrations. There's some NFL teams that do it. The Ravens come to mind. It's pretty fucking cool.
Or Oregon State had that too. Like it wasn't like the full on with Washington, but like they have those LED lights too.
Granted it only works during night games, and Oregon's is going to be a noon 30 kickoff.
Right. So I would imagine it's not going to be terribly long before Autzen installs something like that, because there's nothing cool in college football that Oregon's like, oh shoot,
Right.
we don't have that.
It's quite the. I mean, you really. I mean, they have to put these huge light rails up there. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not a small renovation, but I would just imagine like I was watching. Who was it that Washington played at night a few weeks ago? I was watching it. I think a Dunze had a touchdown. I'm just imagining like if I was a college athlete and I'm running for a touchdown there, and then you get in there and they're all doing their their celebrations
Yeah.
and the lights are. I mean, that's probably pretty cool.
um,
Do you mind if I?
Oh, yeah,
So I was gonna
yeah.
say, we didn't talk about this when all the news broke, but now that the Pac-12 is in the swing of things and it's kind of hitting home every week that this is the last go, you've covered this conference for the better part of a decade. What has it been like for you to kind of, as you're writing these goodbye pieces, starting to realize that you're now yourself going to have to say goodbye to some places, and what are the ones you're going to miss? the most?
yeah. I mean, this kind of goes back to last week. I wrote a goodbye to Stanford
Right.
piece. I was going to do this with Colorado, and then there was just so much Colorado noise that I got sidetracked. But it's
Also, not as much to write about there.
yeah, exactly. It's interesting, man. Like it's been so bittersweet because like there is still a big part of me that knows that there are a lot of new stories coming, and like the thought of Oregon going out and playing, the Michigans and
Yeah.
the Penn States and the Michigan
Come
States.
see my part of the country.
Yeah, like that's really cool, and it's intriguing to me, especially as somebody who is, you cover a beat for 10 years, it starts to feel like Groundhog Day a bit.
Has
So
it been 10 years now? What,
this
20...
is my 10th season.
Okay, as soon as I said better part of decade, I was like, it's been a decade.
I was thinking at the end of this year of like doing like the best of the I-5 corridors camera roll for 10 years on
great.
the beat and like go through what
You pulled out a nice one for that Stanford piece.
Yeah, I'm hoping to do that I won't do it for Washington and like the teams that
Right.
they're going with, but I'm hoping to do it for Arizona and
Yeah.
and some of those others. But that kind of goes back into the Pac-12 had this unique thing of like it still matters nationally, but you still kind of feel like you're in our little special nook of the world. And it just, I think that I'm going to miss kind of some of this is so vague, but like the neighborhoody feeling of
Yeah.
like just covering this conference. Like I know all the writers that cover the Pac-12. I know a lot of the coaches now. I know a lot of the people who work for the Pac-12 who took like a lot of pride in this. And like, those are the people that are getting kind of like, I'm certain everyone's going to be fine getting new jobs, but it's just kind of like it's been the same team playing for a long time, and then it's just like you disband and like you go your separate ways. So I'm going to miss some of that and just like the familiarity of running into people.
Yeah.
Because they go to the Big Ten, like that's going to be such a big conference, and I imagine just the ability to make inroads with some of the people who matter is just going to be that much more competitive and like just that much more corporate.
Everything's going to change. Someone made a point on a podcast I was listening to the other week that like when a Michigan or an Ohio State comes to Autzen will be different. It won't be as loud and Oregon centric because these teams they bring their bands, they bring a big fan base with them, and so there's a lot of things that I think until we see it, we just won't be prepared for. Is there a road trip or two you'll miss the most? Because I was thinking about it. I've been to the Rose Bowl. I went down to Cal. Talk about neighborhoody feel.
Yeah.
I've obviously been to Husky Stadium and to Reser, but I think that was it, unless I'm missing one.
Honest to God, like I'm gonna miss the mountain road trip quite a bit, especially during basketball season, where it's you go to Salt Lake and then you go to Boulder or vice versa. Colorado wasn't a great Pac-12 member, but Utah was. Like Utah was a dominant team on the basketball front. It was a dominant team on the football front. Their fans travel incredibly well. My favorite thing, probably covering Oregon and the Pac-12 throughout my whole career, has been the Pac-12 tournament in Vegas and just seeing the competing red factions of Arizona versus Utah fans that show up there, because like both of those teams were just like way into their college
You've talked
basketball.
about that a few times, yeah.
Just like way into their college basketball. And maybe it's not Indiana or Purdue or some of those teams out there, but like it's very proud out here. I think that the walking through the MGM's basketball venue and just kind of the camaraderie amongst all the different competing Pac-12 fan bases that were there. It's kind of like a friendly, but also competitive, but it's people kind of knew the history around that too. And I think you're losing a little bit of that when all of a sudden you're just going to be like, what's a Oregon and Nebraska fan, argue about, or just like stupid. Like, and it'll probably be fine, but like,
there's a lot of preconceived notions I think about the whole thing too. I just mean on the on field or on court stuff. Like, I think people are downplaying how big of a move it's going to be basketball wise for Oregon. But you look at on the football side, and I know it's easy to say that this year when the Pac-12 is historically strong throughout. Big Ten football outside of like 3 or 4 teams is disgusting.
Yeah.
And it has been disgusting. And so I think, pretty soon some of these Pac-12 teams, Oregon included, are going to get kind of sucked down into just the pit of despair a little bit. It was like, not to say that they'll struggle. I just think it's going to be ugly, disgusting games a lot of the time.
Going back to what you were saying about traveling fan bases and stuff like that too, like, every year whenever Oregon has like a big non-conference game, you'll see a fair amount of Oregon fans get out to Ohio State or like to that Georgia game. But even in those instances, it's way outnumbered. And that's usually like, there's some very fortunate Oregon fans who are able to travel for like every game. But I know a lot of people kind of like pick and choose 1 or 2 road trips to try to get to a year. A lot of these Big Ten places aren't like at super there's no easy route from Eugene or Portland to a lot of these places, and so it's going to be expensive. It's going to be time consuming,
and they're in cities, with the exception of a few, that aren't particularly nice. And I think it's going to make a lot more sense for Big Ten fans or alumni that have the fiscal capacity and ability to travel to want to go to these West Coast schools. The LA's, the Oregon, Washington, because you can make a full trip out of it. Right. You're not going to go down. I mean, Ann Arbor's beautiful.
That's why Wisconsin always travels so well to the Rose Bowl.
Actually, Madison is super nice.
Yeah,
but East Lansing.
Yeah. Oh man, that honest to God, when Oregon played Michigan State in 2015 for that one, that's probably my least favorite road trip that I've had. I had a flight.
Sucks.
I had to stay in like West Lansing, which is even worse.
Lansing in general is just a tough place to be.
I think my hotel was behind an Applebee's.
Yeah. It's as dark and cold as Oregon gets in the late fall, but it's not pretty.
Yeah.
By any means, there's no trees, So, is there one to close this conversation? Is there one road trip, one school? You mentioned Utah. I mean, you've been down to LA several times. I know that'll still be happening, yes, but is there one place you'll miss the most?
I very much enjoy getting to Tempe, having a nice drink out Friday night in like shorts and a t-shirt. Saturday morning, getting up and hiking Camelback, coming down, going and covering a football game.
I wish I'd
get a little bit of a sunburn.
Yeah,
come back home.
Pretty nice.
Football's a different animal, but I am still amazed that Oregon and Oregon State are able to pull baseball recruits from the state of Arizona, or that Arizona doesn't get just their complete pick of the litter. Because in January, if I'm a baseball player, sun's not bad.
Not bad.
Not bad. We're not going to go full deep into the Blazers here. We'll do more of a preview podcast in a couple weeks when the season's coming around. But since we recorded, they flipped Drew. They got quite a bit of defensive pieces. Kind of looks like a nice trade for the Blazers.
Yeah, I mean, they also will probably still trade Malcolm Brogdon, I would assume. Although I think
at some point they gotta like set the roster, Yeah.
Well, and fact of the matter is they have 3 really interesting young guards. They don't have a 4th guard, and they don't have a guard with much, unless I'm forgetting someone, with much veteran experience. And we were talking about this the other day, maybe even before we recorded. You don't want to have all 21, 22, 23-year-olds. You want someone in there with a little bit, especially because a guy like Aiden is now viewed as older, and he spent his whole media day talking about dominating.
Oh my God, I was about to say, like, there should be one player, one center that gives himself a nickname, and that was Shaq. And then I think after that, like, just...
Yeah, we'll see how that goes over. I don't hate the confidence, and I also think, like,
Do you think writers should have nicknames more often? Like, I feel like this is a pretty nicknameless...
Like, give me a... Do you have anything with your name that could work?
Let's continue.
Okay, we'll do it. Maybe we'll do a draft of that later.
Yeah.
No, I think the Drew trade made a lot of sense because Robert Williams, like if he was coming in and he was expected to be the starting center, given how injury prone he's been, I don't think that would make much sense. But to have him maybe pair with Ayton, I don't think they'd be on the court together too much. But as insurance for one another, I really like. All of a sudden, you went from probably the worst center situation in maybe the league. I liked Eubanks, but with Nurk, like to maybe one of the most exciting and defensively, certainly one of the better ones. And it clears the way for these young guards. I don't think you can say enough about what Cronin did the last few weeks now.
Who's the best team in the NBA right now?
Yeah, because I guess the Celtics get a lot better. I'm gonna still say the Nuggets. I don't think that the hype for the Bucks and the Celtics is undeserved, and I think it's very likely that it'll be one of those years where people will start saying the Eastern Conference Finals is the finals. But the Nuggets
did the Lakers get better at all?
The Lakers,
because that's man, still going back and watching that, remembering the Western Conference Finals, which was a sweep, right? But that was probably the most competitive sweep I've ever seen. Like all those games were pretty darn close.
For me with the Nuggets, you could make the argument they got worse through who they lost versus who they added this offseason, and you can make the inverse argument with the Lakers. Anthony Davis had a good bill of health when it mattered last year. Don't know if that'll happen again.
Yeah, what are the chances of that happening 2 years in a row?
LeBron, again, like, I don't want to be the guy that's like, this is the year, but I don't think it's getting better.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, I think the Nuggets are. I don't really see that being a team where the kind of the disease of more sets in because of Jokic and what that does, where he kind of permeates that down the roster. So I would say the Nuggets, but, I mean, I can't wait for that first Celtics Bucks game.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. I'm excited.
I can't believe how quick the NBA season snuck up on me. Like, we had Media Day Monday, and now all of a sudden, preseason.
I was texting with Greif yesterday, and I had forgotten that it was Media Day. And I was like, hey, you got any ideas for Washington Week? He's like, I'm fresh out, man. And I was like, then I saw him, like, tweeting about Kawhi, and I was like, oh, right. Like, you're gone the next 9 months. Like, I'll talk to you later. Buddy.
He doesn't get a break, does he?
No, man. Well, and what's cool about his job too is like he really enjoys what he's able to do when off the beat. Like Greif's like huge in the track and field and has kind of been establishing the LA Times presence there, like leading up to the next Olympics. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't know if I could do like the full NBA beat writer grind, man.
There's a lot to write about at all times of the year, but to have to pump out content
at the same time, my Marriott status is as bad as it's been since I got into this business.
I was actually just thinking about the other day. Is that something I should start doing?
Well, you should probably get like a job first.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Oh, you have a cool piece that's out on the corridor today. You went and profiled Ricky Bella, the head chef at Palomar. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Palomar.
I would really highly recommend everyone who's listening to this. It's a free story today up on the corridor. It is not sports related. It's more kind of, I mean, there's some Blazers layered in, but Shane came to me with an idea of you and your buddy Linus wanted to do like an audio visual writing combo story, and I thought this came together really nicely.
It was super fun. I mean, I think you could probably relate to this when you are so used to doing one type of writing about one type of thing. Any chance you get to branch out, there's a little bit of anxiety that comes with that, and then it's immediately filled with this sense of like admiration for something that's different and pride for the work that comes together. There's always going to be some hiccups, and I think this is far from a finished product in terms of the vision for a story like this and the multimedia aspect, but it was really fun to just get a fresh perspective on things and quite honestly to talk to someone that wasn't a coach or around sports.
Well, and that's what I thought was cool too, because if you go through and read the story, as you can hear my dog barking in the background, if you go through and read the story, you would text me and was just like, hey, can we attach audio snippets and layer them within the story? And with Substack you can do that, and it just adds so much of a different color and flavor to it than like just, I've been talking to Dan Lanning way too much.
Did seeing that, I didn't know how easy it was either, but did Did you seeing that and how it played out?
The gears in my brain are going.
I was gonna say, do you have any ideas of how you might move
Yeah,
forward?
yeah. Honest to God, though, too, you've probably run into this where you are doing an interview and you're like, man, like the audio from this is really good, and like the way that this, we take a lot of pride in being able to like illustrate through our stories of like how somebody talks or sounds or whatever. But like sometimes, especially in this case with Ricky, like they just talk in such a certain way that it just I like the way that is able to highlight certain things that maybe the writing's not able to.
Even when the audio quality isn't amazing, like I don't think it was amazing for this story, and if you were doing a phone interview, it certainly wouldn't be. But it goes back to what we were talking about a week or two ago now, where it's just there's that line of like, do I include this, do I not? And if it could be summed up in like a minute long or really ideally less audio clip, then it's like perfect because it does your job without you having to do much.
Right. It's like they kind of complement each other.
Yeah. So I would, I'm hoping to see you do more stuff like that. I think in general it's really cool.
What did you eat when you were at Palomar?
So I went back. So I didn't eat anything the day that we were there. I went back, had some croquettes. Those have been on the menu for a while, so I don't think that was a Ricky Bella thing, but those were delicious. Ceviche, that was really tasty. We got I believe it was a tuna dish that was pretty tasty as well. Kind of sear on the outside. It had some nice accompaniments. And then a really good fried rice, shrimp,
nice
pork belly. But there was so much I wanted to get, and I'm definitely that person that goes to restaurants and I'm like, I'll order this, but can you get this so I can try that?
Exactly.
Which I'm liking that more places are going to family dining route where it's like get a few things and share. But it was a phenomenal.
I get so stressed out in those situations, to be honest, because I go through like the inner fat guy thing of like, will this be like, what if I like this more than that one?
And
like,
it's not bad to have leftovers.
Yeah, I know, but you like I also don't want to like look like I'm hoarding this one. If
It was tasty. I would recommend it. I will be going back. Yet another great restaurant I've had since I've been here.
Any other food places you've been to lately?
Oh man, I gotta start writing them down when I go. I went back to Eam.
I was just about to say like I have a problem, and my problem is the Eam fried rice and sweet and sour chicken. I get that like once every 2 weeks.
I don't blame you. It's hard to get a table there.
I get it for pickup, and I just come and mow it.
That's such a good idea. Yeah. I went back there. I tried a few more of their cocktails, which were really tasty too. One was like a carrot base, and it was like surprisingly tasty. Sweet and sour chicken, obviously. All their rices and curries are delicious. And then they have this little, I don't remember what they called it, but it's a raw fish deal where you have this really nice sour sauce, tangy, crudo maybe. I don't know. It wasn't even crudo. I don't know what they called it, but it was delicious.
Okay.
You went to any pizza places recently?
No, I've been clean like the last I haven't had a slice in like 2 weeks. No new places have opened up in the neighborhood in the last 2 weeks, so it's been. No,
we do need the definitive rankings from you soon.
That might not be a bad.
Would have been a good bye week thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can haul that together right now, but
no, that'd be a. Because that's something that I would actually take seriously.
Yeah, of course.
Unlike this football junk.
Right.
We've been getting back into the. This is what happens when I eat out too much. Is my middle ground to get back into cooking at home is to start doing like the HelloFresh and Every Plates and that sort of thing.
I've never done any of those.
Actually, quite a bit.
Yeah.
At this point, and we're not sponsored, but hey, Mr. Everyfresh, if you're listening, hook us up.
We got space for products right here. I mean, we got the corridor.
Since like in this house, there's just two of us. Grocery shopping for recipes for like 2 people is freaking expensive these days, and so like
you're almost making it sound like I live here with you.
Yeah, exactly. My old wife Shane. So yeah, it's a nice way to like kind of like we'll do it for a couple weeks, and then by the end of it, it's like I start thinking like I have better ideas of what to do with this than that's what gets me back into buying food at the grocery store.
You've been known to make a mean sandwich or burger here or there.
Oh yeah, I text you every once in a while. Like,
is that kind of your specialty in the kitchen?
Kind of like my work here at the I-5 corridor. I don't try to like pin myself down into like one thing.
Obviously, it's all substance based.
Yeah, I make a pretty mean mushroom pasta. I'm pretty good at barbecue.
Yeah. What's the key to the mushroom pasta?
A good wine.
In the sauce or just with the pasta?
In the sauce.
Okay.
It's more the sauce that I'm good at
Right.
making there. It's like it's like a cream wine. You reduce it down, mix it in with a little bit of Worcestershire, and caramelize some onions.
Okay, I'm gonna have to make that one of these times.
I mean, if anything, I'm hitting at least the keywords that sound good.
Yeah, we can have it presented
Worcestershire.
for the podcast.
Yeah,
next
exactly.
Time, maybe.
Now that we're doing this on video, hello America, goodbye America, and if you want, we could put your logo right here. Just get in touch.
Hopefully, maybe a caffeine-related product reaches out to us. Have that.
Do you think I haven't been lively? Is that?
I haven't been.
I mean, it is by week. Yeah. Guess what? Well, next week's Washington week, so I don't think that'll be an issue. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody.